How many secrets can fit on the tip of a pen? At the bottom of $1 million contract, a man found more than just numbers and deadlines. He found a sentence that shouldn't have been there. Hidden among cold clauses was a confession of love, delicate, almost invisible, but capable of turning everything upside down. She was the lawyer that no one saw in the hallways, her steps light, her gaze downcast, coffee in her hand, her head full of laws. He was the unreachable client, owner of glass, rooms and accounts that no one dared to question. But in the silence of the office, among folders and spreadsheets, a forbidden desire was born. Without the courage to speak, she wrote. She hid words that only those who read carefully could decipher. And he read, line by line, until he felt the weight of each syllable. That single clause, forgotten at the end of the page, made it clear. Inside someone who seemed made of iron, there was a heart beating, hungry to be seen. Now, nothing makes sense anymore. Is it true love or just a game to win everything? The lights stay on, the contract on the table. What was certain becomes a question, and every look between them holds the promise that this story no longer fits on paper. Laura has always been the kind of person who prefers silence to the spotlight. In the cold corridors of that marble office, the sound of her heels mixes with the dry sound of the glass doors closing behind meetings that she herself facilitates, but where she is rarely invited to sit. She is the first to arrive, the last to leave, the one who knows where every comma is, every detail that can save or ruin millions. Those who look from afar see only a serious lawyer, immersed in lawsuits, a small piece in a game that is too big. But those who dared to really look would see something else. Beneath her sober suits and her hair always tied up, there is a desire that she herself tries to hide. Laura learned early on that emotions have no place in meeting rooms. That feelings do not sign contracts. That those who show their hearts become easy targets. So, she kept hers behind clauses and opinions. That is how she survived so long there, surrounded by men who talk loudly, bang on the table, close deals with fake smiles and gifts that mean nothing. But a part of her got tired of being invisible. And it all started when he walked in. Kaio. The most sought-after client, the man who makes shareholders kneel for a signature, the kind of presence that silences any room. He walked into that glass room as if he was certain that everything was his, and left a trail of confusion in her head. At first, Laura did what she always does. She hid behind spreadsheets, wrote down every detail, wrote down every email with impeccable commas. But every response from him, every quick glance over the contracts, every time he said her name, Laura, it was as if he was pulling a thread inside her that no one had ever touched. And that thread began to hurt, to heat up, to throb. At the first meeting, he didn't even remember her name. At the second, he praised her work as if he were praising a well-programmed machine. But it was at the third that everything changed. A quick, unintentional touch. The tips of her fingers touching as she passed him a piece of paper. A touch that didn't last a second, but burned for hours afterward. From that day on, Laura began to write letters. Not ordinary letters, but single words, phrases, confessions that she knew she would never have. The courage to say while looking him in the eye. Words that, alone, seemed small, but together, they told everything she felt. And, night after night, after reviewing contracts, erasing names, fitting paragraphs, Laura began to sew these words where no one would look, in the footer of a document so large that no one would review each line alone. To the world, Laura was just another tireless employee, who gave up weekends to ensure every clause was perfect. But deep down, Laura was a woman, trapped in a cold lawyer's body, holding back a passion that threatened to spill over every time she heard the sound of his voice saying, Laura, please review this for me, she checked. But she also checked her own chest, to make sure no one would see what was hidden inside. Kaio never imagined. In fact, he never needed to imagine. Women were nothing new to him, power even less so. But never a woman like Laura. Never someone who made herself so small that she ended up becoming too big inside him, even when he tried to ignore her. It was easy to ignore smiles, invitations, explicit intentions. What was hard to understand was Laura's silence. The way she looked away when he called her name, but trembled just hearing her own voice repeated by him. Deep down, Laura was afraid of being discovered. And at the same time, she fervently wished she would be. Because being invisible is safe, but it is cold. And every line she typed in the early hours of the morning was an attempt to be seen without having to really expose herself. A cowardly way of screaming that I am here, without having to open your mouth. As the city lights went out outside, inside her office the monitor glowed, illuminating her tired face. Among complex opinions, the confession fit like someone hiding a jewel in their jacket pocket. Was it risky? It was. But Laura needed to feel that she existed, even if it was in secret. And now, at this very second, while the contract rests on his desk, the question that remains in the air is, how far will someone who has never been seen go? How far will a woman who is tired of keeping her feelings hidden go? How many sentences can fit in the silence of someone who loves in silence? Anyone who reads this story now knows, every detail matters. Every word written in the early hours of the morning has a weight. And those who pay attention discover that nothing is just work, clauses, or money. Comment below, how far would you hide an impossible love? What detail would you put out there for the world to see, even if no one paid attention? Right, because each word you say keeps the story alive inside those who believe that even silence can confess secrets. Kaio has always been the kind of man no one dares to contradict. Heir to one of the largest holding companies in the country, he learned early on to dominate meeting rooms with the same silence he inherited from his father, a silence that carries more weight than shouting. The people around Kaio are always tense, careful with every word, and lower their eyes when he passes by. He doesn't need to raise his voice to decide the fate of whoever is at the table. A look is enough, a brief yes, a no that ends entire futures. In the mirrored corridors where Laura walks invisibly, Kaio is omnipresent even when he's not there. His name dictates deadlines, changes contracts, brings down entire companies and builds others in a matter of hours. To those who observe him from afar, Kaio is a business conqueror, but an unattainable man. His face is impenetrable, his suits are tailored, and his phone doesn't ring for no reason. But Laura, who observes closely, has seen things that no one else has seen. She has seen the distracted way he fidgets with his watch when he pretends to listen to proposals. She has seen the almost imperceptible smile when he finds a solution faster than the entire team put together. She has seen the tiredness in his shoulders when the last light in the building goes out. And, in the midst of spreadsheets and reports, she has also seen the man behind the CEO, a man who, perhaps, needed someone who could see beyond the numbers. And that was exactly what Laura did. She looked silently on the other side of the table, with her notebook full of clauses and scribbles, pretending to write down deadlines when, in fact, she memorized every detail of it. The knot of his tie, the discreet smell of his expensive perfume, the exact way he said Laura when he wanted something to be resolved without errors. It was almost a ritual. He asked, she did. He trusted her, but without knowing how much she kept inside her heart. To Kaio, Laura was invisible, like so many other names that passed through his busy schedule. But somehow, something about her always made him stop for a second longer. Maybe it was her silence, so similar to his own. Maybe it was the fact that, in the midst of people who spoke loudly, Laura said everything without opening her mouth. He never asked her anything about her life. And yet, something in him liked to imagine. What did she do after work? Who was waiting for her at home? Why was such a sweet look hidden behind such technical words? Meanwhile, Laura struggled not to let out what she felt. She knew it didn't make sense. He was everything she wasn't: power, money, fame, a surname that opened doors she never dreamed of entering. Every detail screamed that it was impossible. But when the heart decides where to live, logic turns to dust. And for Laura, Kaio became a home, a forbidden place that only existed inside her. Courage didn't come from talking, it came from hiding. Hiding was her only chance to exist by his side. Hiding each confession within cold words, turning vows of love into harmless paragraphs, fitting sighs into footnotes. No one would read it. No one would waste time on it. No one, except him, on any given sleepless night. On the other hand, Kaio had no idea that a contract could carry more than zeros and percentages. For him, each page was a shield against betrayal, a war map to protect everything he had built. But that clause, small, discreet, almost a typo, had nothing to do with audits. It was a spark. A risk. An open door to a world he didn't even know he needed to visit. And when his eyes first fell upon those words, something inside him trembled. A man accustomed to anticipating the next step, to controlling every comma of every negotiation, suddenly found himself hostage to a sentence. A silent invitation to decipher a heart that had been beating silently for so long. Deep down, perhaps Kaio had always suspected that there was something different in the way Laura looked at him. An extra second of silence when he approached, a slight tremor when their hands touched by accident. But he never thought she would have the courage to expose herself, even in such a veiled way. Now, the contract is there, open on his solid wood desk. The air conditioning hums softly, the city sleeps. Outside. Inside him, a whirlwind that no one sees. Each word read is a breath that disturbs the wall he built around himself. He, the man who doesn't fall in love, who doesn't trust, who doesn't let anyone get close. But, on paper, Laura arrived. She arrived without asking permission, without promising anything, without demanding anything in return. She only left there what didn't fit inside her. And that, for Kaio, is more dangerous than any poorly written clause. Because love cannot be torn apart, it cannot be annulled, it cannot be revised. And now he knows. As he runs his fingers over the underlined line, something in him breaks silently. A crack in a world where everything has always been too solid. And in the darkness of the room, between the rustling of papers and the muffled sound of breathing, Kaio understands that that quiet lawyer may have been the only person who saw who he really is. And that, for a man who controls everything, is the only detail capable of dismantling everything. The night seemed endless. The building had been asleep for hours, but Kaio's office was still lit, an island of light in the middle of a silent city. He was there, alone, surrounded by piles of papers, numbers, tables. With each page turned, his eyes burned, but his mind refused to turn off. For a man like him, trusting was always the mistake of the weak. Every detail passed before his eyes as if he could find, in a misplaced comma, the clue of a betrayal disguised as a clause. It was the price of being in charge of everything. No one is trustworthy. But that night, Kaio didn't know that, between the figures and paragraphs, something much more dangerous was waiting for him. He held Laura's contract as if he were holding a shield. Line by line, he reread everything he had read before. He reviewed it not only to find flaws, but to make sure no one would deceive him. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of the pages moving and the slight creaking of the chair. As he leaned forward, until, in a footnote, a sentence that didn't fit. Small, almost invisible. Words that didn't belong in that territory of cold terms and legal threats. Kaio frowned reluctantly. He put down the pen, put his hand to the back of his neck. He read it again. Once, twice, 3 times. There it was. A passage so subtle that anyone else would have overlooked it. But Kaio never overlooked anything. And now, that sentence seemed to scream. It was a confession, but not an explicit one. A secret sewn between the lines. If you couldn't read it, you would call it a typo, a forgotten draft. But he knew. It was intentional. A loophole in a document that was supposed to be proof against feelings. There, amid clauses that protected millions, was a glimmer of something Kaio never imagined he would find, an exposed heart, hidden in letterhead. He dropped the contract on the table, leaned back in his chair, and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, his chest tightened. This wasn't just a technical detail, it was a love letter. And worst of all, it was for him. How could someone so silent, so reserved, have the courage to put her heart into a contract? How could Laura have mixed desire and business in a single paragraph? For a moment, Kaio felt angry. Angry for not having seen it before, angry for not having realized what was pulsing right under his nose. The room seemed smaller, suffocating. The cold air from the air conditioning was not enough to calm the heat rising up his neck. He ran his hands over his face, closed his eyes, trying to remember every detail that could confirm what he felt now. Every touch of her hand, every long silence, every time her eyes got lost in him, as if they wanted to call for help without making a sound. The dawn remained still, but inside him everything seemed to be falling apart. He got up and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights shone, but they seemed as distant as anything that cannot be controlled. And there, in the reflection of the glass, Kaio saw a man who had always been sure of everything, except now. Because now he held, at his fingertips, a delicate bomb, written by hands that had never asked for anything out loud. He went back to the table and picked up the contract again. With each word, Laura seemed to whisper, in a language that only someone who had ever feared being ignored would understand. Was it a cry for help? A trap? A game to get something from him? Part of him wanted to tear it all up, to end the matter as if nothing had happened. Another part, the part that Laura had unknowingly poked, wanted to understand everything. He wanted to hear from her mouth, without filters, why that woman chose to hide feelings where there were only numbers. He imagined the scene, Laura, sitting alone, late at night, typing each legal term with surgical precision, and, in the midst of it all, spilling what she couldn't say out loud. He imagined her hand shaking, her heart racing, the feeling that she was about to be found out. And suddenly, he realized the depth of courage that lies in silence. Kaio was a man accustomed to dealing with lies, games, blackmail. But there, in that veiled confession, there was none of that. Just a silent request to be seen, to be read, to be understood. And, strangely, that hurt more than any market scam. Because there was no profit there. There was surrender. He stood there, motionless, staring at her signature at the bottom. Laura Costa. A common name, a small signature. But now, more powerful than any contract. He closed his eyes, feeling a pang of something he couldn't name. An almost childish fear of messing with a truth that could mess up everything I was keeping standing. His head was in turmoil. One side was screaming that it was just a detail, that tomorrow he could pretend he hadn't seen it. The other side wanted answers. He wanted to ask her to her face why, what for, and what she expected of him now. He knew that, from the moment that secret was brought to light, nothing would ever be the same again. The clock read almost 3 in the morning. The city made no noise, but inside him everything was noise. He leaned against the table, running his fingers over the paper as if he could feel her skin there. He thought about calling, about sending a message. But typed words would not be enough to deal with a silence so full of truth. As the cold air mixed with his warm breath, Kaio understood that he was about to open a door that he had always kept locked. And what was worse, it was a door that Laura had left ajar, waiting for him to go through. The city was already breathing the beginning of a new day when Kaio was still there, standing in the same room, with the contract open like a wound he didn't know how to heal. While the morning light began to tint the mirrored windows of the building gray, a fire spread inside him, burning every certainty he had built brick by brick. The coldest voice in his head kept repeating, "Fire him. Cut the evil at the root. Destroy it before it grows." He was good at that. He always had been. Cutting out problems was his specialty. But that wasn't just a technical problem. That clause carried a piece of someone who dared to love without permission. And that was what disconcerted him the most, Laura's cowardly courage. He could call the legal department, he could send a warning, he could demean her to the insignificance of some mistake. He had plenty of power. But this time, it was another question that refused to leave him. Was this real? Or had Laura played him the only way someone like her could? A silent trap, a way to have value where she had always been invisible? Kaio knew the corporate world too well to ignore possibilities. He knew the weight of a signature, the strength of an accusation, the danger of a sentence taken out of context. If he wanted, he could bury her career before the sun finished rising. But every time the idea came, an image came with it, Laura, sitting in that small room, dimly lit, alone, spilling confessions where no one would dare look. Why would someone so discreet risk everything for so little? There was no hidden bonus in that clause. There was no calculated benefit. Just words, feelings stitched together between cold paragraphs. That left him without an answer. Kaio, the man who always knew everything before everyone else, was now sure of nothing. As the building woke up, the employees arrived, the lights came on, he stood there, watching the city swallow the night. He needed to decide quickly. And he needed to look at it again. Only then would he know. Laura arrived as usual, light steps, hair tied up, the same gaze that had avoided meeting his for a long time. But now, every second of silence between them had weight. She pretended to be normal. She sat in the meeting room, opened her laptop, and reviewed papers that she couldn't really see. Each click of the mouse was an attempt to hold her breath, to keep her heart in her chest. She knew he had seen it. She felt it on her skin, in the still air between them. But she didn't know what he would do with it. Kaio entered the room slowly and threw the contract on the table. The dry noise echoed in her chest like thunder. Inside, Laura wanted to disappear. Her face was cold, her hands sweating under the table. On the outside, her posture was impeccable as always, her eyes lowered, her mouth silent, waiting for the sentence. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. He stood behind her for several long seconds, reading every movement, looking for a lie in the way she blinked. The silence spoke louder than any threat. Every person who passed through the hallway felt the tension hanging like a cloud. If anyone dared to ask, they wouldn't understand anything. But whoever looked closely would see, that was where everything broke. Inside, Laura kept telling herself that she wasn't a coward. That she had chosen to hide because it was the only way to exist by his side without disappearing completely. Her biggest fear wasn't losing her job. It was losing her only chance to be noticed, even if it was for the wrong reason. And now, with the contract thrown on the table, everything she hadn't had the courage to say weighed between them like a confession written in blood. Kaio took a deep breath, sat down on the chair at the end, snapped his fingers, and leaned his back as if preparing for combat. But there was no fight at that moment. There were questions, a million of them. What did she want from him? A chance? A promotion? A forbidden romance in a place where relationships were as cold as the marble in the hallways? Or was it just the truth, pure, raw, unfiltered? He looked at Laura as if trying to see inside her. He looked for cracks, signs of a game, clues of lies, but what he found was silence. The same silence that had always surrounded her, but that now screamed every word she dared not speak. Inside him, doubt was digging deep. It was too dangerous to believe. Even more dangerous was to ignore. As the room breathed that heavy air, each second was a promise that nothing would ever be the same again. A contract would never again be just a contract. A clause would never again be just a detail. A look would never again be just a look. And, even without an answer, Kaio knew he needed more. He needed to hear from her voice what he read on the paper. He needed to understand if it was desire, if it was courage, or if it was just a well-calculated trap. Outside, the office routine continued innocently. People were in a hurry, phone calls were made, coffee was dripping in the kitchen. But inside that room, two worlds faced each other, that of the man who could do anything, but didn't know what to do with a hidden love, and that of the woman who had everything to lose, but chose to feel it anyway. And now, whoever hears this story here, feels this weight together. Because whoever has loved in silence knows that it only takes one detail to turn silence into a storm. Write here in the comments, to what extent do you think Laura was truthful? Would you hide a love like that? Answer, because each story gains strength when it finds a voice on the other side. And this one is just beginning. The clock struck almost 8 o'clock at night when the last employee left, turned off the lights in the hallway, and left that floor plunged into a heavy silence. Only 2 rooms still. Breathe light, his and hers. Laura reviewed emails she hadn't read, typed automatic responses, while each second seemed to scratch her skin from the inside. The sound of the elevator rising broke the silence like a strong beat in the chest. Firm footsteps echoed, getting louder, closer, until they stopped right at the door of the meeting room, where she had been alone since the day began to die. Kaio appeared at the door without announcing anything, as he always did when he wanted to maintain control of everything. But at that moment, the one in control was the crumpled paper he held in his right hand, the contract that had become a confession, the secret that had held him hostage to a single question. Laura looked up slowly, as if she already knew the answer before hearing the question. He didn't smile, didn't threaten, didn't raise his voice. He just pointed to the empty conference table and nodded. She understood. He stood up as if he were carrying his own body in glass boxes, each step a warning that there was no turning back. The meeting room seemed larger without anyone there, cold as the marble of the table that separated the two worlds. Kaio left the contract in front of her, opened it to the exact page, footnote marked, the confession there, embedded like an exposed wound. He didn't sit, he stood, watching her every movement, every blink, every tremor of breath. Laura took a deep breath, but the air seemed to not fit inside. Her fingers touched the edge of the paper, as if they wanted to protect it from a destiny she could no longer control. He broke the silence with a question that sounded more like a sentence. Did you write this to trap me, or to free me? His voice was low, hoarse, full of everything he didn't usually show. The contract was there, but the ones who were naked in that room were the two of them. Laura felt her legs wobble, her heart catch in her throat. She could make up a technical excuse, pretend to be wrong, blame it on the early morning, a slip of the tongue. But at that moment, lying would be more humiliating than any truth. She looked up slowly, locked eyes with him for the first time without running away, without lowering her head, without hiding behind well-written paragraphs. The answer came out in a breath, shaky, raw, but whole. I wrote because no one had ever seen me, until I saw you. The silence after that was not empty. It was filled with everything that had always existed between them and never fit into formal words. Kaio blinked slowly, as if he was swallowing it without knowing where to put it. In his mind, numbers, strategies, million-dollar negotiations, all of that dissolved into a detail that did not fit into a spreadsheet. She asked for nothing in return. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask for love. She did not ask to be loved in return. She only left there what was burning inside. And that, for him, was more dangerous than any blackmail. Because too much truth dismantles walls built with iron. Laura shrank back into her chair, but at the same time she seemed bigger than she had in any meeting. For the first time, she wasn't the invisible lawyer. She was just a woman who dared to write what she never had the courage to say out loud. Kaio walked slowly, walked around the table, and stopped behind her chair. The sound of his breathing mixed with the silence that swallowed everything. He rested his hands on the table, leaned forward, and brought his face closer to hers. His perfume, so cold in the hallways, now burned too close. He didn't ask the question again. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all. What to do with it? Throw it away? Tear it up? Keep it? Pretend he hadn't read it? Every beat of their hearts marked the rhythm of a silent war. She had risked everything to be seen, and he didn't know what to do after he saw it. Deep down, Laura wanted him to scream, break the table, explode. Any reaction would be better than that silence that said it all. But Kaio, always so calculated, just whispered a sentence that seemed more like a twisted confession. Do you know what you did to me? It wasn't a question, it was a confession that he, the man who controls everything, was now the one who had no control over anything. Laura felt tears burning in her eyes, but she didn't let them escape. Not yet. He took a step back, took a deep breath, and looked at the claws again as if looking into a mirror that showed him what he had spent his life trying to hide. His mind was spinning. Was it real? Was it just courage or a plea for salvation? And, worst of all, what would he do with it from then on? Around them, the building seemed suspended in midair. Every floor asleep, every employee at home, every unspoken word hovering like dust shining under the cold light of the lamp. She took a breath, clasped her hands in her lap, and felt her chest almost explode. He was still there, standing there, watching, breathing the same heavy air coming out of her. Doubt was the thread that held everything together. If it was a lie, it would be easy to destroy. If it was true, it would be impossible to ignore. And deep down, a part of him, the part that no one sees, desperately wanted it all to be real. Because inside Kaio there was a man as invisible as Laura had always been. And maybe that was what hurt the most. As the two measure themselves in silence, those who watch from here understand, the next word can break or build everything. And those who truly feel know the value that a hidden detail carries. Right here in the comments, what would you do in her place? Would you keep it or let it slip? Because this story breathes in each confession that lives hidden inside those who do not have the courage to speak. At that moment when the silence weighed more than any signed clause, Laura understood that there was no way back. Everything she was, the discreet lawyer, the exemplary professional, the invisible woman chasing deadlines, all of That was there, naked, embedded in the tip of a sentence that didn't even need a witness to exist. Amidst millions, numbers, tables, and cold rooms, Laura understood that love doesn't ask for permission. It can't be negotiated, it can't be filed away in a drawer. You can't tear it up along with an old contract. Love lives where no one looks for it. She could still feel the heat of his breath close by, the tension that lingered in the air every time their eyes met, even without wanting to. Every second after that question was a slow, silent fall, impossible to stop. Inside, fear was beating like a hammer. He could destroy everything with a single word. He could wipe out years of reputation with a simple internal communication. But at the same time, the truth that pulsed between them was so much greater than any threat. Kyle was still standing, motionless, but something about him was no longer the same. The man who had always known what to do now seemed smaller in the face of the confession of someone who had dared to risk everything just to be seen. He looked at Laura as if looking at a detail that had always been there, but that only now made sense. His mind screamed orders to protect everything, his image, his power, his money, but his chest said something else. A low voice, muffled by years of control, whispered that maybe he wanted to be freed, not imprisoned. Maybe Laura had opened more than one loophole in a contract. She had opened a door that not even he knew still existed inside him. In her chest, each beat was a prayer that he wouldn't turn his back. Because more than any answer, what Laura wanted was to stay. Not as a disposable piece, not as a shadow who reviewed documents, but as someone who was seen, truly seen, by the one who seemed most inaccessible. And deep down, that desire was as dangerous as the claws that put them there. The room was still cold, but the air felt too heavy to fit in her lungs. Every detail was remembered in silence. The first touch of his hand, the first coffee she left on his desk without the courage to look him in the eye, the first email where a thank you he typed made her chest burn as if it were a confession. All of that now fit into a final point that didn't exist in the contract, but that did exist in what she felt. Kyle took a deep breath, ran his hand through his beard that was beginning to grow, and rested his fingers on the edge of the table as if seeking support to keep from falling into himself. The contract was still there, open, exposed like a secret that refused to die. With each line revisited, he fell deeper into the only truth he could not buy. Someone dared to love him, without receiving anything in return, without guarantees, without a notary's signature. Just for loving. Laura said nothing more. He knew that any word now could break the spell or destroy the only bridge left between them. What needed to be said had already been said. The rest was silence, a silence that told stories that no one else needed to hear. And it was in this silence that everything came together, every hidden detail, every invisible comma, every clause that, deep down, was just a way of screaming to be seen. Outside, the lights in the building were starting to go out. A janitor was dragging a bucket down the hallway, the sound of the squeegee on the floor echoing as a reminder that the real world goes on, relentless, while hearts try to survive hidden behind spreadsheets and deadlines. But inside, nothing was routine. Two worlds faced each other as if searching for a gap to exist, even knowing that tomorrow could charge dearly for it. And whoever has come this far, whoever has breathed every word of this story, understands, love is not a clause. It is not a comma. It is what gets stuck in our throats when we swallow what we feel so as not to lose what we pretend to control. It is what grows hidden where no one dares to look, until it is too late to ignore it. Laura discovered, in the most dangerous way, that love is the only contract that doesn't need a witness. That one detail can change everything, even if no one is watching. And whoever hears this now, whoever feels their chest tighten just imagining what will come next, is part of this story too. Because every knowing look, every held breath, every accelerated heartbeat on the other side of the screen is proof that, even today, love is worth the risk. Right here in the comments, what lives hidden inside you and you haven't had the courage to come out yet? What silent clause would you leave at the bottom of your life to be found by someone who knows how to read beyond the words? Tell us, because every detail of yours makes the space exist. This channel is a refuge for those who truly feel, for those who are not afraid to confess that love, when it is real, is not written, it is felt. Like, comment, hold this story with the same strength that you hold the most beautiful secret inside your chest. The next chapter is already breathing, already growing, already calling for those who stay. And those who stay, live it all, detail by detail, as long as their heart can bear it. Anyone who has been through this story down to the last detail understands. Here, each chapter is just the beginning. The next encounter awaits those who open their hearts to feel more than just pretty phrases, to experience secrets that routine tries to hide. In each video, new truths, twists that take your breath away, and details so small that only those who truly feel them can see them.